We're on.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, October 14th, 2021, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each Commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of Thursday, October 7th, 2021, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss those minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, October 7th, 2021.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Each Commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 7.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 6.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Agenda item 7.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That brings us to agenda item.
Was I off? No, 8.
That's next week.
Wrap it all up.
Okay, all right. That moves us to agenda item 8, which is docket 5-BF-22. This is the fiscal year 2022 broadband grants. Before I get started, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys today in terms of how to allocate these funds. I just want to give a shout out to our broadband office and to the screening panel. This is a small but mighty team that day in and day out, I mean, they are constantly looking at data, talking to people, figuring out where the need is greatest, and they really have expertise in this area. And I personally thought that this memo was really well done. I thought it was written in a way that was easy to understand. There's a lot of information. There were a lot of applicants, but I thought that they did an incredible job. So I just want to say thank you. And I also think I kind of liked the fact that we had a preliminary discussion about this. I think it was helpful. And I think in my briefings with staff that they indicated that they found it helpful too. So I think it's something that we should consider going forward when we look to the state broadband grant rounds, because I just think we end up with a better product. And I think that the memo in this case is a perfect example of that. So I'll just give a really high level overview of where we started and where we are, and then I'll turn to you guys and we can talk about specific projects. Okay, so in March of this year, the state of Wisconsin received funding via the American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARPA. In May, the U.S. Department of Treasury issued binding guidance and regulations for the use of those funds. Pursuant to that guidance, Governor Evers then allocated $100 million for improvements to broadband infrastructure. When we opened the competitive round, we received 242 applications seeking more than $440 million. And as I indicated, on September 23rd, we met to discuss and determine the initial issues of timeliness and eligibility. And I think our chief legal will be happy for me to note that that was not a final decision. That September 23rd meeting, for legal and procedural purposes, we're not bound by that initial discussion. We did receive comments after that meeting. And during the course of that meeting, we also asked staff to consider past performance of applicants and also geographic diversity, but only amongst proposals that have identical merit. So there are a number of different maps available. They're all available to the public. You can look at it by technology type. You can look at it by overlap with other federally funds that are available. And then the screening panel undertook the process of going through and doing a merit evaluation. They used 10 total factors, and those are all outlined in our memo. The first 6 of those factors come directly from that Treasury guidance, and then the final 4 factors are from our state broadband expansion grant program. There are a couple of modifications that staff suggested we make. And maybe what I'll do is I'll pause here and see if you guys want to make any opening comments, and then we can make our way through the memo. Sure, Noah.
Yeah, I too want to, this was a huge task for the screening panel and staff to go through, and I appreciate all the effort that they put in. There's so many data points to remember. I also think that the splitting it up into at least 2 meetings is helpful, just because, well, we've had the applicants or the applications available to us, and to go through them, you know, it takes a lot of time to absorb and to sort through, and I think having that preliminary discussion helped distill too as review went on. So I agree with that, and you know, otherwise I'm ready to talk about some of the how the criteria fell out and what would work here in Wisconsin.
Okay, sounds good. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, first I wanted to thank all of the applicants for all of their efforts. Obviously, this is a huge volume. Every application was significant in its own right for putting that together, so we recognize that effort. This round represented an unprecedented amount of funding and an unprecedented demand, as you just said, Chair, up to $420 million of applications. We have not seen that before. It is really great to see all these robust applications that aim to get so many people in Wisconsin connected to high-speed internet. I want to thank Governor Evers for allocating the $100 million and placing the trust in the PSC to continue delivering this high-quality grant program. Thank you, Chair Voss, for your leadership to carry this out. The program is about 4 times larger than any of the annual rounds that we've done, so thank you for your leadership. And as you both said, thank you to the staff for all your efforts to carry this out. And the reviewers for the diligent review, which was very helpful to my decision-making process. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So as I indicated, there were 10 factors that the scoring panel used. The first 6 were dictated by the guidance from Treasury. And those are on page 5 of our memo. I'm not going to go through them. They're publicly available. But the panelists each independently scored every single application. Then they came together, they talked, they sought information, clarifications, and then they came up with attachment 1, which is the merit list. The first modification in their ranking concerns Shibardon Telephone Co-op. They requested a grant award of nearly $11 million. And they included $518,207 in matching funds, which comes down to less than 5% of the total project. And as was pointed out in our memo, if the panel had included this, and I kind of refer to attachment 1 as above the line and below the line. So there's a list of 83 recommended projects that would leave about $125,000 remaining. And so when I talk about above the line, it's the top 83 projects according to their rank. Had the panel included the Shibardon project above the line, it would have taken nearly 11% of the funds available. And largely based on that reason, the panel did not recommend this project. I'll also step back and say, we have the discretion to make whatever choices we want. We're not bound by the recommendations of the panel nor the comments of staff. So we do have the discretion to deviate from what they recommended. However, in this case, I agree, and I agree that there are several other projects that would have to fall below the line if we were to include the Shibardon project. So for that reason, I agree with keeping it below the line.
Yeah, I agree with that too, and you know, for a variety of reasons. I mean, that it's a almost stunning amount, really, to when you think about the supplement. So and you know, staff did recommend some other from that telephone company or that company as well. So I agree with you that that should be, well, below the line.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the same spot. My tally had 5 other projects by this company, about $13 million that were recommended, and so this one, just with the low match, was not as competitive, and I agree that it would be below the line for my list too.
The second modification to the panel's ranking results from overlapping project areas. There's several sets of proposals that overlap the same project area, and as staff points out, in prior rounds we have decided that only one applicant should receive funds for any one given particular project area. And the screening panel did follow that advice when they were ranking. And so what we have is there are a number of projects that overlap with RDOF or with the Alternative Connect America cost model, which is referred to as ACAM. And there's a significant amount of discussion paid to the overlap with RDOF and ACAM funds. It's important, I think, to point out that we are not precluded by the Treasury guidance. We're not precluded from awarding ARPA dollars to those projects. Our memo contains a Q&A from the guidance that says that funds may be used in conjunction with other federal funding sources, provided that the projects meet those eligibility requirements. So we're not prohibited from allocating ARPA dollars, but we've talked about this in the past. There's a balance in terms of how we should be allocating dollars. And certainly what we wouldn't want to have happen is, and we talked about this in my briefing, was if it's going to cost $10,000 per location, we need to be sure that applicants aren't getting $15,000 per location and using those dollars for other purposes. So I think it's really important, and it's a testament to staff who keep a very close eye on this to ensure that we're not getting into those situations. I think it's also important to point out that as it relates to some of the RDOF awards and some of the ACAM awards, the recipients receive those dollars on a regional basis or a statewide basis rather than by project. So I think I've asked this question every round that we've had, and thankfully the answer is always the same, but that the recipients of RDOF dollars are not precluded from building if we award dollars to an RDOF auction area. The way I understand it is that those dollars are awarded and the recipients can actually begin construction immediately. In some instances they have, and in some instances they haven't. But just because we award dollars in an area that has some overlap with an RDOF announced project doesn't mean that that winning bidder cannot go forward. So it's not an either or, the way I understand it, and I do think that that's an important distinction. So there are a number of those projects that we have. And then we did receive a number of objections. We received objections specifically related to overlap for the RDOF dollars. Spectrum, in particular, they objected to 103 of the 242 applications because of this overlap with RDOF. And it was explained in the application guidelines that for RDOF projects that had firm plans to complete construction by December 31st of 2024, our panelists would deduct 10 points from the competing project. But it wouldn't eliminate that competing project. And it appears that in some cases, Spectrum is asking us to eliminate the competing project rather than just reduce the score of that competing project. If an RDOF winner had no firm plan, was either unsure or said they were unable to meet that December 31st, 2024 deadline, then the panel didn't give any reduction to that competing project. And I think that's important. It's important for a couple of reasons, right? Again, we want to be judicious and we want to be very deliberate about how we allocate the dollars. We want to make sure, and the guidance is clear about this too, that we're not overbuilding. Mm-hmm. We can't do that. So we need to ensure that we're not overbuilding in one particular area. On the other hand, if we award ARPA dollars, there's a bit more control that we have over the timeline versus the RDOF projects. So in situations where the RDOF winner said they were unable to meet that deadline, then in my mind it was clear that just on the basis of timing, that competing project should prevail. So that was sort of the analysis that I went through in my head. And so I'm going to, there are a number of applications that overlap. And when I read through the applications, when I looked at the map, I also pulled up the map that goes all the way back to the beginning, to 2014, to take a look to see where we have allocated dollars. All of that information layered on top of each other is a really long way of me saying that I'm comfortable with the 83 projects that were recommended by the panel. We can talk about geographic, we can talk about overlap with RDOF now, but in my mind, I think that all of these factors were taken into account when the panelists went through and ranked the projects. And I don't have any information available to me that would tell me projects need to be moved from below the line to above the line. And the RDOF overlap, in my mind, was the biggest issue in this round in particular. And I don't think that that's going to change going forward. So I will pause here. Commissioner Nowak, thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of objections, and we got some late ones too, which I did, or I guess more responses to our last meeting, read those and took those into consideration. First, again, staff I think did amazing work here, looking at the scoring criteria. But to me, though, maybe it's because of the federal guide. There's a lot of reasons that make this both an objective and subjective exercise, right? And the federal guidelines, and I think it's important that they're guidelines, are really a one-size-fits-all approach that they give to all the states, right? And I think that we have to apply those guidelines, but also then use them in the context of what is best for Wisconsin and what is basically the lay of the land here of what exists, what the providers are, and what the applications that we've received. So I think that's again, I think important that they're guidelines and not a mandate that to me, that didn't have to be strictly followed because, the people that made that up in Washington, D.C. don't know the exact lay of the land here. And I think that's incumbent upon us and our staff and the applicants to show us what is best and necessary here. So I considered the guidelines, again, in light of everything that the applications here. Now, because I had some issues with some of the guidelines, right? So we gave priority to organizations that had geographical boundaries. To me, that essentially works against the long-term goals of this program, which is to expand this as far as possible. So I'm talking about more of like the cooperatives, which are fantastic, but almost by definition, right, they're limited in where they're going to continue to grow. Whereas you see the other companies that can leverage their grant dollars to reach more homes and businesses with their own dollars in future rounds. So I thought that, you know, a company that was for profit shouldn't be any, we need to keep that in context here. That was not a huge, that was not really a consideration for me. So then you have all this, you have the objective criteria. And if you would just apply those strictly, I think it can lead to outcomes which don't produce the most effective results for what's best for Wisconsin. Then when you look at what is done, you kind of look at it and you look back and go, okay, where did we end up? Does this make the most sense? You know, you eyeball it, right? And so I think most of that time, like the vast majority, I think, of the recommendations here, I agree with. But there are, to me, instances where the scoring produced results that we should adjust. Because to me, the overlap was also, it was important to me because I start this every single time going, our primary focus should be putting funding where there's unserved areas and they have no overlap or no other competing project, no other red flags, right? Like the cleanest ones we should target. That's the low-hanging fruit. And there still, I think, is some of that out there. But I think, again, if you apply this objective criteria, you don't get to that you leave some of that low-hanging fruit on that below-the-line part. So that's where I'm like, we need to make some adjustments here, and I think that's incumbent upon us to review it that way, knowing what we know here in Wisconsin. So what I did was take a look at, we had multiple attachments, which is great. And so I took the merit list and then merged it basically with, I don't know where the attachment was, that showed so attachment 1 and kind of cross-referenced it with attachment 4 and really took where there is overlap, because while there may, in some instances, may not be a firm commitment, there's a commitment. There is a promise of dollars, there is potential, where there are some projects that ended up below the line in the recommendation list that have zero potential for right now for projects. So I think we should hit those first. So what I did was cross-reference that and showed that there was a significant number of, and I talked with staff about this wasn't, just merging spreadsheets, which it's not pretty. You can send out the attachments. There's some weird page marks, but that's my limits of software. But some of those still that fell below the line in the merit list, I think if we gave consideration to those areas that had no funding, no other funding coming in, no unserved right now, no overlap, would have risen above the line. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I ended up, we could, have a longer discussion to have maybe staff redo it all and show us a list that way. But what I did was pull out. Then there should be getting 2 handouts. I pulled out, I think, some of the projects that came across as, and it was brought up in the memo as well, where this is a close call, right? Or these are still great projects, but they didn't make it because X. So I pulled out projects to me that had that significant overlap where there was greater potential, and I substituted, and that's for the most part of that top, and I'm going to hand out number 2 for people listening online. those had that substantial overlap, or staff had flagged as, this is where someone else has gotten money to come in. Mm-hmm. So I took those out, but with the exception of Project 166, the Bad River Superior Connections, which the reason I put that one out, one, it was now that we've taken out the Shebardin one, this is the largest one. But that's not the reason. The reason is we just funded this entity a few months ago with a $3 million grant. To me, past performance is a big thing. We don't know how that's going. And to double up on our funding for an entity that we haven't funded before and we don't know the performance in the same general area, it's like, maybe, I wish them all the best and success, and hopefully that works out well. And in a future grant round, we get good remarks. They certainly should get due consideration. But I just thought it's a little too soon and a little too quick to know how they're doing before we double up the amount of grant money. So that's the balance of the other ones in that top chart are ones where I felt that there was that overlap, and maybe the only reason they got a slightly higher mark was for an objective criteria that I think doesn't quite fit the needs here in Wisconsin. So, because we ended up, if you look at the map staff put out that map with all the dots showing where the recommended projects land, there are some pretty large gaps in the map. The one that really stood out to me was the southwest corner of the state, Grant and Lafayette counties. And we had some really good applications down there, and they didn't make the recommended funding list. And they were good projects. There's no overlap with RDOF. It's an unserved area. Like, for example, the Lancaster one, 46 businesses, 560 residential locations. It's at last mile. And it's from a company that we know has a history here, a long history of doing good work in Wisconsin and around the country. Same thing, too, with the Potosi one. So I felt that, and I think Lancaster, that's a repeat application we've seen before. It was maybe DSL before, but it's now fiber. So I went through, so what I did was the number where I have all the ads, and, these are, I think the first two on that list are very important to me. They're all, I think I would love to see all of this substituted, but, I picked the other spectrum, the Brown County and the Walworth County, again. The Walworth County wasn't overlap, the one that staff said was a very close call in the memo. And they did indicate that they would be willing to revise their project proposal to avoid the overlap, and I thought that's great. We can put that in the grant agreement to do that because it ends up serving more locations. Then there's the, Badger Telecom, the Farmers Independent up in Grantsburg. That's still, at northwest part of the state. So those this is a result of the analysis I did saying, let's try to continue to hit those low-hanging ones first, where there's not that, are we going to overfund? Is there maybe someone else going to come in? I still want to try to, that's how I came about this. So I don't know if you have questions on individual funds.
Well, Commissioner, can you just tell me again what we're looking at on attachment?
The big one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Attachment 1.
Yeah. So that's basically attachment 1 that staff did.
Okay.
But in the left-hand column, you'll see notations regarding significance, like it's shortened significant. So I flagged which ones had that significant RDOF overlap versus more modest overlap, because I'm not saying we can't ever, we shouldn't fund any part where there's no overlap, but my goal is to minimize that. And that's what I did here. It would be impossible to surgically, rejigger things to avoid that. But I tried to minimize it. I took it another step further and minimized it from what the merit list is.
And then the highlighting representatives.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, well, those are all ones that potentially that were identified, again, after consulting with staff, that they don't have any RDOF overlap, and there are some, they don't have any other potential red flags, like there were some that didn't have RDOF overlap, but maybe they also still didn't identify use by a company for the hookup, or there was some other red flag in their application. So yeah, the highlighted ones are ones that, to me, again, are the ones with the least amount of conflict and issues.
And just for those that may not be familiar with the Commission's website, you can find the handouts we're discussing on the Commission's event calendar on the lower right-hand side.
Okay. Commissioner, let's hear from you. And then
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you both very much. I agree that the merit list that was presented was generally extremely well done, and this round I thought the staff did a great job, and in the memo too, really laying this out. I think I read the memo about 4 times, maybe 5, because just trying to understand exactly what they're saying. As we discussed, this round is federally funded. This is not the state dollars, and so with the federal dollars came the Treasury guidance, which you alluded to, which you both have alluded to, and that is in the form of their interim final rule. As we look to carry out that guidance, it does clearly have implications for the merit list, as we've talked about. And I'll just point out 3 things that I think made a big difference based on some of the applications that weren't recommended. First was the focus on nonprofit, cooperative, and public ownership, and obviously we see that we had many of those entities apply. And so if you aren't one of those, as we talked about in our initial discussion, there was actually more than $100 million from just those entities. And so that was one. The second was fiber optic technology and the ability to get ideally 100 megabits per second up and down is the goal, with a minimum kind of 100 and /20 to start with. And then the third was the last mile connections, as we talked about initially with the proposals from WIN, which is a lot of middle mile. They put in a lot of proposals. They have a map that I found to be very helpful, showing how this would connect. But because of some of these priorities, those didn't rise to the top from the analysis, and I agreed in large part with that. With that said, there were a few listed in the memo that I thought were right on the fence, and I think they just are because of this question, and the staff lays it out. These are really clear examples of what weight do you want to give to RDOF and the ability to get that done and the dollars committed there versus, as you said, Chair, the ability for us to sort of ensure, based on the grant agreement, this has to be done by 2024. In many cases, those applicants are committing to doing it by 2023 at the latest. So how do we weigh the certainty of getting it done in 1 or 2 years versus the potential of RDOF maybe by 2024 or maybe later? And I think those are some of the things that weigh to me. So the 3 that stuck out to me that were in that kind of on the fence were the 24/7 Town of Sherman one. And so that was the 24/7 applications in our merit list were all bunched together except for that one. And that one was on the 3rd page, number 59 in the ranking, if you're looking at the rank column. The second was the Sauk County, Lavelle, Lime Ridge. And that came in at number 76 in the rankings, and then the third was the Vernon County, Ontario. And I think, Commissioner Nowak, those three are all on your list too. So to me, those were the closest calls. And I think with that, I would be ready to take a break. I'm not saying I wouldn't fund those, because I think the analysis was very good about them. But I do think there was, as we always have, more worthy projects than we can fund, no matter what way you slice this. So those were 3 that I think we're a little more on the fence. And to your point, I think the memo about number 1, Oconto County, there was a couple of pretty good ones that could be entertained. I think one or the other of those, and then the southwest corner of the state, I-2 notice. And I think that was a challenge in the southwest. There's mostly TDS.
Yeah.
A good company. We know they can get it done. They've listened to our guidance to move to fiber, so we provide that durable, long-term solution for customers. But their match is 30%, whereas a lot of other ones are coming in with higher. And then a lot of the other ones have really significant support from local governments. Letters of support, but dollars committed. And I think those are just some of the factors we have to decide how to weigh. So I'll leave it with that. Look forward to the break and some discussion.
I missed your third one.
Yeah. It was, again, these are just on the fence, but the Vernon County VCC Ontario. And that was
86.
Yep, and the rank order was number 70. The ranking was number 70 on that. And that, to me, that was on the fence. Mediacom did object to that and said they serve that village. But this project would serve the village and then start to get out into the more rural areas. So it was a little bit of a mix, and like it was on the fence. But I think it's worthy if we fund it. I think there's other worthy ones if we decide not to. It's a tough call.
Yeah, I mean, these are hard. And this round, I think 30% is still significant. I think it was probably lower because they went to fiber, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, how consistent are we going to apply it then? Because again, the Bad River one was maybe a 10% match,
yeah.
and then it was recommended for $6 million. So,
Agreed.
To me, it's more, what's your past performance? Is there any overlap? What's the quality of that application?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that stood out.
Mm-hmm.
So
great.
I mean, I too looked at geography, and it did stand out. The southwestern portion of the state was lacking in this round, but then I went and I pulled the map, what we approved in the fiscal 2021, and there were a significant number of projects that we did award in that last round. So that gave me more comfort that we're not completely. I do think we need to be aware of that, and we need to be mindful, like you said, Commissioner Nowak, that this is, all the dollars are from the federal government. This is our state that we are charged with allocating the dollars to. So, okay, how about we take a break?
Can I just ask Commissioner Nowak one question? Because there were a number of TDS ones.
Yeah.
So was there any specific reason? I'm just looking for
the Lancaster, Potosi.
Lancaster and Potosi, there was a Cassville. Yeah. And there was Mount Hope, Fenimore Beach.
Yeah, I just went, I know, there were a lot there. I just went for one. Lancaster we've seen before. It was the last time. So, that, and really I think the biggest difference here is it's fiber now and not the DSL, and it was close last time. So that's why I put Lancaster there. Really any of the others but Potosi. And that area, again, while we funded that area in the past, there's still obviously a big need based on coming in. So that's why.
Yeah, because I had looked at Cassville too.
Yeah.
The Cassville is $829,000.
Yeah.
Lancaster is $2.9 million. So fitting it into that list, if we're going to drop some out.
Yeah. Right.
That was kind of a challenge. So okay. Thank you for that. Sorry.
Yep. Okay.
We'll take a break. How long it'll take. I think Dennis, yes.
Just one point with back from Lower County. We do have the revised project estimate. They reduced it by about $760,000. So it's
what's the final number? We're not going to do
math. Can you do that subtraction for us?
Yeah.
So 2.2 something. 2.2 something. Right?
The revised project request would be $2,144,450.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Very helpful, thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Oh, well, there. Now so with that, you can throw Castville in on the list. And
Well, that's what I said. 9,000. Okay.
So, well, okay.
All right, does everybody have their calculator? Shoot first.
You got the-
We'll be optimistic and say 3 o'clock. No? 3:15. Okay, the 3:15 it is. Oh.
We'll reconvene at 3:15.
All right, okay, we're back from our break. I took a look at Commissioner Nowak's handout, and I made notes about Commissioner Huebner's suggestions. And where I landed was I would agree with Commissioner Nowak and Commissioner Huebner. I would remove, and I'm just going to refer to project numbers.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Get confused. So I would agree, I would remove number 186. I would remove 82. I would remove number 7. And I would remove 54. I would add 172. I would add 160 at the revised amount that was provided. I would add 65. And then I would also add 123. And that...
Now you're throwing.
Oh.
Hang on.
Good.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't on your hand.
No,
Right,
no,
it's
it
not on
wasn't.
your hand. Sorry.
No.
Page 7.
This is a different one.
7 of my other handout or 7 of
7 of your color.
Okay.
It's, project number
Oh, the Oconto one.
123,
Yeah.
Yep,
rank 90.
Yep. And that actually would bring us to a total awarded amount of $99,932,498.
Say the number again?
99.
Yeah, okay,
932,
okay,
498.
okay,
So it gets us pretty close.
yeah, okay.
And in my mind, that represents kind of a really good give and take.
Sure.
So that's where I landed.
I'm just going to mark these. So 123. You had 4 that you would add, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
That one there. Yeah. Chair, can I just ask about 54? So you're taking that one out because of the overlap with the number 160, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
Yep, that's
thank you.
Can I ask, I know Commissioner Huebner, you're going on response, you went with the Spectrum Walworth over the Lancaster. Was it just the math worked out, or what was that? I mean, I had them both on my list,
Yeah.
but they were somewhat ranked in a priority.
Yep.
That's just why I was asking.
It was mostly, honestly, to comport with mathematics.
Mhm.
Yeah.
be a math issue. $8.
Could someone tell me what's the rank order of the Spectrum Walworth, just so I can find it? Oh, that's why. Yeah, right at the top. Got it. Okay, that's why I'm missing it. Just below the line. All right. Thank you.
I didn't look either, and I know your suggestion is to leave the Bad River in. You know, you mentioned maybe comparing it, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but the previous funding for Southwest Wisconsin, but I don't know if all those projects we've funded in the last couple of years would even add up to the now $9 million that within this year alone we're giving to that one company. Mm-hmm. That's what, you know, again, I really just want to see some performance before we spend that much money in one part of the state, in less than 1 year. That was a thought that occurred to me while we were in break.
I think it scored well, it ranked well. I think it's an important project in an important part of our state. But I understand your concerns. But I didn't feel strongly about taking it out. I think it's important to keep it in.
So folks listening don't think we've gone anywhere. People are just doing math at the table. We have not been disconnected.
Yeah.
We started playing.
Christy, I found it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate, I'm glad you're there on, if you take out 186, 82, and 7, obviously I support adding in 172, 160, and 65. Those are all on my, I would have added the Lancaster over the Walworth initially, just because there wasn't a competing application for it. Even no, and that. So that's just the order I would flip. That would be my preference, just for that. And I don't have adding the Oconto one. I left that one off. I know it's a good area. It hasn't been underserved, but that was an RDOF overlap that I thought was significant. So, see where Commissioner Huebner is on that, and if he would worry that on the Walworth versus, I guess, Lancaster issue. Okay.
Commissioner Huebner?
Let me get my thoughts together. Thank you. Yeah, on Oconto County, the things that stood out to me why I thought it was worthy was it was listed in the staff memo on page 26. There was something that weighed for me, and this kind of cuts in different ways, but the county in this case had pledged $250,000 to each of those projects. It had a lower match, and there was RDOF overlap, but this was one of those areas where Spectrum didn't have plans by 2024 to reach it. And so it's just that trade-off of if it's not by 2024, how long will it be? And we don't know. We can't know that. But I thought, as we talked about in our previous discussion, geographic diversity was, I thought that was good to look at as a screen, and that was an area where we didn't have one, and I just think it's a good project, so I would support keeping that one in. The Farmer Grantsburg one that you had identified as well, Commissioner Nowak, that really had no objections, has good match. I think that's a good project. I didn't have a lot of input on the Walworth County ones. I think that the chair's proposal is a fair one. I think we're funding one or the other. That's the way it was set up before. But I think that the Spectrum proposal is good. I think both were good. And then as far as Southwest, I liked a number of those. I think the challenge was, as I talked about, the match and the private company as opposed to this priority. I think on balance, we've obviously met, in my view, the Treasury guidance of a prioritization, and it doesn't have to be at the exclusion of private companies. So, I mean, I would love to see more funded in there. It's just a matter of the dollars. And so I think the Potosi one, the Cassville one, Lancaster, they're all in the same realm of being good, but on balance, I think that the chair's proposal is a very fair one, and I would support it. So.
And I think it's important too, when we talk about the Southwest part of the state, is to talk about the technology, right? So typically, it's fixed wireless projects. We saw a lot come in. Those are perfectly appropriate under the state program, because it's such tough topography in that part of the state.
Right.
And so I really did, I really looked at your suggestions, Commissioner Nowak, and then your comments, Commissioner Huebner, and the goal was to try to get as close to the allocation as possible in the most fair and measured way.
Okay, so it would be adding 172, 123, 160, and 65.
Yes. Correct.
Right, so adding three of the ones you and Commissioner Nowak raised.
Yes. Correct.
And then removing four of the ones you had raised. So
correct.
Tough calls on all of them.
Right. Hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Let me just look at that.
So the way that...
Oh, so, hey, well,
yeah.
did you... Okay, you did have the reduced amount for the wall.
Yep.
2.2.
So removing those four projects comes up to $4,949,556. That's what we would remove. Remove all four projects. And then adding the four projects that we've discussed would add $5,006,777. So it's almost.
And there was a little, the original merit list was $125,000 short, so it was just a matter of fitting it in.
Right.
Ocano, you guys are both, the Ocano you want to leave in. 5.
Yeah.
Well, I again, my preference would be to, because I had it in the order, I would switch out the, and find some other funds somewhere to keep the Lancaster in, but if neither one of you are there, I obviously kept the other ones on my list. They were just a lower priority. So I appreciate you taking a look at these. So, and I think for next time, for me, it was helpful, like doing what I did with where the overlay is, and because there is still some areas of low hanging fruit, and I'd like to see a priority list where that is. It's like, where can we get the cleanest bank shot, right? Mm-hmm. And so doing that overlay on, whatever fund we're using next time for money, I think is important so we can see those sight lines and maybe a little clearer. And it's hard when you get so many applications in. So I appreciate this, and I can accept it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Noack, just to put a little meat on that bone, would you then, going forward, would your suggestion be that we kind of do what you did?
Yeah.
Sort of overlay where the other sources of funding are?
They did it in separate charts, and it was like, which was great. I mean, it's maybe better than getting a huge spreadsheet, but I think it gives us that clearest picture of the goal, again, is unserved, wholly unserved, no other conflicts. And I think doing it, if we get a list like that and a priority list that way, that would be helpful.
Right. I think that's helpful. I just think it's helpful guidance. Okay. All right. So we also have a couple of procedural matters. A couple of things were raised in the memo. There was two things. First thing is we talked about prior performance of grant applicants, and for our purposes here, it was really a bright line that they went back and looked, and it was, have any of the applicants been in default, or even gotten close, or have any applicants been subject to the clawback provision? Because remember, we operate on reimbursement, so it's not as though these dollars go out the door and then it's a wing and a prayer. The project has to be fully built, and they have to comply with all the reporting, and then they get the money. So I think it would serve us well to get more information about past performance, and I'm wondering if there's an ability to look at projects 2 to 3 years out, because right now we don't have that ability. The final report comes in, and that's it. There is no other additional reporting.
Right.
Obviously, we can't change the rules in the middle of the game, but I do think that going forward, it should be a consideration when we draft up the application instructions, that we're going to take a look at certain, to the extent that it's available, we're going to do a longer look back to give us a better snapshot of performance.
Like take rate and all that? Yeah.
Stuff that isn't readily available when they submit their final status report. And that's through no fault of the applicants, it's through no fault of ours. I think it's just as we learn and grow, these are things that could be added. Also, staff mentioned in the memo that if there are applicants who are untimely or who are lagging in getting in some of those reports, that we allow the grant agreements to include warning letter language is the way that it was described. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I would support that. And then we did talk a little bit about the whole, if they say it's $10,000 per location, but it turns out they're getting $15,000 per location after they add up all their funds, we need the ability to then either have it come back to us where we say, no, nice try, but try again. And so I do think that the language in our memo about reporting, I would support that as well. So on page 30 of the commission memo, I would be in favor of alternative 1, but I would also add that warning letter language. And then I think looking at the projects 2 to 3 years after they've been built is something that we should ask staff to include in application guidance going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I landed.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine. I was fine with alternative one, and obviously with your suggestion on the further review, longer-term review, which coincides with the argument I made on the Superior Connections one. I think that you made my case for why we should have taken that one out. But just as one last ditch to try to convince you guys. So I agree with that.
Okay.
I think we need to know how's it working long term. It's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot as alternative one on page 30, and I think your addition of the warning letter is fine. I too was looking for the take rate. The ones that provided it in their application I thought was really helpful. It bolstered their applications when they showed 60, 70, 80% take rates in those. So I think that's a fine idea.
And that's where I think it becomes helpful when we funded the fixed wireless. And in some areas, again, it's just going to be absolutely necessary. But then if we see 2 years later a same company coming in with fiber, what happened, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, and then going back, just to clearing up from procedural standpoint, going back to page 28, I think I'm correct in saying that we are all at alternative 2.
Yeah.
Which is just an amount.
Yeah.
Yep, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
Yep.
All
Right. So, we're ready? Looking at
Yeah,
scroll line.
Yep.
Docket 5BF 2022, I move that we approve the applications for Broadband Grants funded from the ARPA program and award them in the amounts pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 21st, 2021 at 10:30 a.m. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Will we stand adjourned until Thursday, October 21, 2021?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.